All right, well, this is our third attempt trying to record this, and we're out for a walk earlier, and then, yeah. Anyway, we're now in a nice Hilton bar, so we'll just do what we can here.
Nice background music, at least.
Good background music. It's very cheery. We're going to have beer in a second, then we're getting ready for actually an awesome MLOps meeturp at your office as well. So
should be fun.
Yeah, it's cool. Awesome. So you and I have been friends for a long time. Love nerding out on a lot of different topics, data, CrossFit, machine learning, etc. But some of the audience, maybe they don't know who you are. Tell the audience about who you are.
Yeah, I'll take it away. So I'm Gaviria Rojas, one of the co-founders here at Coactive. My co-founder and I met at MIT when we were doing our undergrad. From there, we each got our PhDs. And more recently, we started Coactive together back in June of 2021.
Nice.
Really, what we tackle at our core is we help folks really search, filter, and do analytics on their visual data. But on the larger scheme of things, I think what kind of you and I intersect a lot is I think a lot about what it means, everything that's happening right now with AI and unstructured data.
Yeah.
And at the fundamental level, like where's everything shifting towards? So that's a lot of what's kind of on my mind, and hopefully I get to pick your brain later at the fireside chat.
That'll be fun too. I guess back to Coactive, like why did you all start a company around that problem? It's an interesting one.
So nice. It's a really good question. So I would say part of it for us was kind of this epiphany around, like if you go back to kind of the stuff that was going on like about a decade ago or so, right? You had all these companies that survived the dot-com boom, and you had all these massive amounts of like logs of users on an e-commerce site. People, of course, realized that was hugely valuable, right? And we really had to, we had to figure out essentially how do we actually churn through all this data and to be able to make sense of it. And once we kind of have distributed systems, right, like things like MapReduce and technologies like Spark came about, really that's what powered a lot of this big data kind of movement, right? And we got roles coming out of that, like data science. We had different functions, and that was like a whole movement. Part of the reason why we started the company is we realized that there was actually a setup for a similar revolution, but not around structured data, but around unstructured data. So things like text, audio, images, video. Pretty much we saw the setting with enterprises are just amassing more and more and more of this visual data. They're chucking it to S3 or they're chucking it to GCS, and they're just not really doing a whole lot with it.
Right.
And then there's folks like us that have PhDs that we go and touch it. We do like mini ad hoc things. But it's really hard to scale. It's really hard to work with it, right? And outside of like Meta and Google and some of these top folks, right? That everyone else is just like miles behind. And so we saw that number one, a bunch of unstructured data, hugely valuable, right? And number two, with transformer architectures and division transformers, like wow, they're like AI is kind of at the stage where, we can do things in the zero shot setting and different kinds of settings where like really there are AI tools out there now that allow us to understand unstructured content at scale. Right? What we were missing is essentially like what are those systems that merge the two, that merge the data systems, right, and that merge AI to be able to do it at scale and make sense of unstructured data at scale. And we said, hey, someone's going to build this.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, we're getting our beers right now.
Thank you. And,
cheers. Well,
cheers.
Oh, shit.
And I mean, quite frankly, we said, look, someone's going to build this. There's going to be another data revolution, but it's going to be powered by AI, and it's going to be around unstructured data. Yeah. And we say, hey, let's build the world-class version of that, but for visuals.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was kind of the original motivation. From there, it's been a big journey, and part of what we really focus on is how do you make something that's really accessible, that's not just for the ML developer or just a software engineer, but even just for the layperson, right? And I think the power there is, you can criticize or you can be a fan of ChatGPT however much you like, but what they really did nail was having a really simple interface where, like, when my dad's telling me that he can try it, right? That's when you craft the UX, right? And so we try to think a lot about that, but how do we do that in the setting of you have images and video, and you want to actually leverage AI to understand what's there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So to understand what's there, what are some of the common types of questions I would ask about my unstructured data?
Yeah. So for a lot of folks, we always say there's various levels of sophistication. So surprisingly enough, one thing I've learned in this journey is that most folks are actually at the do nothing stage. Yeah. So what I mean is most folks are throwing deep learning models at things. No, they're just chucking all their data in some cloud store and some sort of key value store that's cheap, and it's just kind of there in cold storage, and they don't really do a whole lot with it. So
Okay.
A lot of like, how do you like? A lot of folks don't even know what they have. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Some folks are in the world of they have human labelers, they have some computer vision APIs, and they're starting to make sense of it. But quite frankly, what we found over time, we started out thinking that there was going to be a lot of traction around doing analytics on people's data. Mm-hmm. But what we found time and time again is that people were just starting actually at ground zero. It's like, what's in there, right? How do I search? How do I just find what's in there? Sometimes you know what's in there, sometimes you don't know what's in there. So helping people just be able to search through it, helping people be able to filter through it was really the foundation that I think a lot of people needed. And then once you're able to like, hey, this is what I have, and these are the things I care about, and then you can actually get in this really interesting world of data pipelines, data analytics.
So is it kind of creating to borrow from the data world, like there's a notion of a data catalog? Is one of the notions creating a data catalog of your unstructured, maybe visual assets, for example?
Yeah, I think that's one view of it. I think more broadly speaking, I think it's really just about like, how do you create an interface between the storage layer where all these things reside and the people up here that have either some sort of structured query like SQL, right, or something more natural? And how do you let them have a really simple interface so they can go and you essentially create a platform that can go and find whatever they're looking for, or goes and answers whatever question. So right. I think we look at it from a more like solutions almost perspective. I mean, underneath the hood, we think a lot about the fundamentals, and we have our own we're big data nerds in how we think about unstructured data, and we have our whole philosophy there, right? But above the hood, I think what we try to give a lot of folks is just that simple solution of just like, you tell us kind of like what you're trying to do, and you express that in whatever makes the most sense to you, whether that's SQL, whether that's like a natural language query, right? And the system should be able to go and retrieve that information and get you the answer you're looking for. Yeah,
that's super cool.
Yeah.
What are some of those, I guess, philosophies or approaches that you feel really strongly about?
Yeah. So this, we've been talking. You've been talking a lot about like data modeling and all these pieces, and that's something we think about a lot. I think a lot of there's a lot of people doing work in this space, right? I think you see a lot of it in AI more with text, more so than with images and video, right?
Yeah.
Though I think that's fast approaching. And to use an analogy here, right? Once people start tackling the question of like, how do I use LLMs at scale? Then all of a sudden these questions popped up, right? About the infrastructure needed, about the tooling needed, about the everything from hosting the models to serving the models to like even fine tuning the models, and even had things like prompt engineering come about, right? There's a similar set of questions that exist once you switch the modality of data that you do an AI on to images and video. That it just doesn't quite like. This is something where I think we've been thinking about this for 3+ years, but there's a whole conversation there we have that we're still just in the very early days of having with folks.
Right.
And so one of the things there's a few things that we've kind of had those internal conversations and discovered through the years, and I think more of the most fundamental ones is I think there's a similar paradigm shift happening. As to what happened when we went from ETL to ELT, right? We went from hey, you have the data, you fit it to some schema, and then you dump that in some database. So then we said, no, dump all the raw stuff in a data lakehouse, right? And then do schema on read, or then put in whatever format you want at the time of ingestion, right? And I think that was like a really big fundamental shift in how you thought about it and what it allowed you to do. And there's a similar thing happening with unstructured data that I think particularly applies to images and video, in which if you think about it for the past 20, 30 years, the way people have made sense of images and videos is not by, a lot of times it's by manually looking at the content, but the way they try to make sense of it at scale is by working on proxies of the content. So you're not necessarily looking through the images and video scale, you're looking through, say, tags, right? Like annotations, metadata, right? Different fields have different terms of it, but you generate some sort of metadata, some sort of textual description, some sort of tags about the images in the video, and then you usually chucking that data into some sort of system like Elastic, and then you're searching that, right? So you're really searching through proxies of the data, a lot of times weak proxies, right? And that's kind of a world where really, if you take a step back and you think about what's happening, is I have all this data, I'm trying to just search through it. So the first thing I need to do is I need to tag it all.
Right.
I need to then load those tags somewhere, and then I can search. So the acronym we have internally is that's like a TLS, right?
Yeah.
But if you think about what you can do today with AI, you can actually just load the data through AI systems, have some sort of semantic representation of it, right? then you can actually just search straight off the bat from those semantic representations, right? There's like interface of this if you think about like what clip models do, right? And then anything else that really isn't captured by the very generalized representations that you can learn from like zero-shot learning, then you can tag those remaining things, right? And so you almost go from this world where you have to tag everything to death, then you have to load it, and then you search it, but your search is limited by really your...
whatever tags you have.
Exactly, right? And that's a never-ending game. You can switch it from this world from like tag load search to a world of like load search tag, and you kind of flip it on its head. And what ends up happening is most people are just trying to get to the S, to the search, right? And so you go from a world where like it's super expensive, super slow, and you're working on weak proxies, and to a world where like you actually just, you're limited now by how well the AI can understand what is underneath the hood. And as it turns out, a lot of these more powerful models that are coming out actually do a really good job at understanding what's going on underneath the hood. And so, so we call it essentially tag load search. And what we see, that's the world of the past 20 years, but what we see going forward in the next 10 years that I think a lot of folks haven't realized is that now there's an entirely different workflow of load search tag. Which kind of breaks the entire industry.
About when did load search tag, when did that realization come to you?
I say Cody, so it's slowly kind of been in the back of our minds, but this is something that Cody and I have been chatting about for like a few months, for like 6 months. It's kind
interesting.
Of kind of really materialized into a view.
Okay. And this explains some of our conversations, because I think we were, so for the audience, Will and I like to nerd out. So we were on a call once, and you're trying to describe to me basically the grain of how you would insert data into a database for searchability. So if it's like, are you when you're looking at an image, for example, are you starting with this object, or this other object in the image, and like what's the search path of the grain that you're trying to, of the record in the database, right? And so and it got me thinking about that. But this seems like it's a completely different type of a way of thinking about the problem, where it's almost more of a graph problem in some weird way.
No, I mean, and I think if you really think about it from what people are actually trying to do, it actually helps people get 80% of the way there, with 20% of the effort. Because a lot of folks are still thinking about this world of like tag load search, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're stuck in that world where you're thinking about it, it's like, how do I make an AI model, like one model to fit them all, that just creates as many tags as possible about the images, right? But we have these different kind of semantic views, so to speak, of like how an AI can go crunch through numbers and then come up with, say, embedding representations of what's in there. You can actually skip that step altogether and just have a human like do a very natural interface and search through things, as opposed to having to create all these tags and then search through the tags. And so it's like that's like a very key piece that people haven't realized. And so one of the things we see is a lot of, don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of value in being able to generate tags and having those like one model to rule them all kind of approach. That's still very valuable, but we run into folks time and time again, and the first thing they tell us is, I just want to be able to search or filter. So how many metadata tags can you generate for me? And we just tell them you don't need them, and then they're like, "What are you talking about?" And then there's this whole
kind of broke their brain.
Yeah.
So an interesting question I would have then is, how fine grained can this search get if it's not being explicitly tagged? So would it be possible I could find something that maybe fairly obscure, and not just in your body of images, but also like within an image itself? I mean, it's a very hidden thing that I wouldn't notice unless the system brought it to my attention. Is that possible now?
No, and this is what's really interesting. I think with a lot of the attention sort of based frameworks, and it's you can actually get pretty detailed in some of the things, like just go on Hugging Face, check out like the latest version of whatever state of the art right now, and say something like clip, and you'll be able to see just the power. But the beauty of it is that, remember, now we've gone from load search, right? So you can get like 80% of the way there. There's still this long tail of like things that are maybe domain specific, or like, what does this word specifically mean to you? Like, I always use this example, like, if you think of the word like torch, right? To us in the American like lingo, we think of like, we're holding something like a flame, right? Maybe within the Bay Area lingo, you think of like PyTorch, right? Right. But if you're like in the UK, right, they're thinking about like a flashlight, right? And so there's always going to be some nuance there about like how you describe things and what it means, right? And specifically in the context of enterprises or people doing this in the business setting, everyone has different internal definitions for the same words. Like, for example, there's some folks in fashion that we were working with, and they have very different, like if you go from one fashion company to another, some of them think of it in terms of like the sport, some of them think in terms of like the trends, some of it think in terms of like the seasons, right? There's all kind of ways to describe the same thing.
Yeah.
But the beauty of it is that number one, with 20% of the effort, you can get 80% of the way there.
Jeez.
And for the remaining 20%, that's when the tagging comes in, and you can actually just kind of merge the two. If you can be in a world where you can search for most of the things, but the remaining things you just need to tag, you get to a place where all of a sudden you can create a relatively simple solution that can pretty much address most of the needs that most folks there have. And that's really where it's been our focus, right? In creating that interface so it's super simple to get started and then super simple to iterate, right? Because the other thing is, like, if you're in the world still like human labelers, the cost of experimenting on the tag side is very high.
Right.
So how do you also bring the best-in-class machine learning to that? And you know, I'm getting now into the weeds here, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, there's always going to be this tail that search will always struggle with, because of the fact that what's in your head may be different from mine, and what matters for one enterprise may be different for another. Mm-hmm. But that can be solved by essentially having dynamic tagging, where like you have the humans in the loop giving feedback to the system that tags things, and so all of a sudden you've lowered the barrier to search, you lower the barrier to tagging, and you can now get in a workflow where like you can do these things with images and video that you could never do before.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a feedback loop too.
Exactly.
Right.
That's where like the part that we really focus on with the data-centric AI is like really powerful. What's the, you know, we all know that now that a lot of these like models do a fairly good job in just zero shot, right? Like just like out of the box, just being able to identify things.
Yeah.
So the next question becomes, if you have something much more specific, what's the minimum amount of feedback or the minimum amount of effort that you can ask a human to then be able to go and have like a really accurate classification, a really accurate tagging system? And that's kind of where we really focus with the data-centric AI piece.
Interesting.
To make that interface really simple and make that really like active, where you have a human in the loop. Yeah.
So on the data-centric conversation too, when we're walking on the street trying to record this the first time, you know, you guys are associated with MLPerf, and then there's something else that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So Cody Cody Coleman, my co-founder and our CEO, you know, he was one of the original guys from the ground of the Dawn project, MLPerf. Folks that don't know, that's really the world where you're benchmarking ML performance, right? And more recently here at this New Rips, we have a position paper, and we're really launching something around DataPerf, which is really what is the benchmarking from a world of data-centric AI. So what that effectively means is, for a lot of folks today, benchmarking means the data set is fixed, we hyper-tune the model, and then we test the performance.
Right.
And what we're trying to establish with DataPerf is what happens if the model is fixed, right? And you hyper-tune the data, whether that's the test set or the training set. So one example is like, if you're trying to say do visual classification, what's the smallest data set, training set that you can create that will train an accurate classifier, right? Regardless of the architecture, right? If you think about it from the standpoint of the test set, like what's the hardest test set you can make that will fool even the state of the art at the moment, right? And the idea here is not only do you shift the focus back to data, but you kind of almost create like this like ratchet where the training sets get better, so the models are able to like learn much more effectively, but then you also make the test sets harder. And so you're able to actually like slowly improve state of the art over time, as opposed to doing what we have now, where we have these like benchmarks that are like, some of them are like 10 years old, right? And so that's really the vision for DataPerf, just shifting the focus away from models to the data, because we fundamentally believe that there's a lot of low-hanging fruits there. So check out the paper. It's called DataPerf. It's already published out there in Europe's 2023. So yeah, feel free to give it a read.
Dang, when did that come out?
I think well, technically the New York is going to be the December, but I think we've had it in archive for a little bit, and the final version was just I think just about a month ago. You know, working with folks from led by folks from Harvard, working with folks from ML Commons, Google, ETH Zurich, Meta, a lot of fantastic folks in this effort. So yeah, I think it's just, I think what we're trying to do is just, we fundamentally believe that there's a lot of work to be done there, and rather than trying to like get 1 or 2% more in performance from just optimizing models, like I think there's a world where we can, if we shift the focus back to data, we can make much more substantial gains. Yeah.
I mean, in your experience, how important is high quality data? This might be a softball question, but
yeah, yeah. So
Will, is it important?
Full disclosure, Cody and I created the visual classification benchmark. But that's exactly the question, and Cody has a lot of work in this area as well with his work with seals. But I mean, yeah, really important. I think you can choose to be in a world where you have a lot of very noisy data points, and that's kind of how you learn like the pattern of what you're looking for. Or you can be very selective in what you train your AI model with, and it turns out that sometimes you can cut the order of magnitude of data points by like many orders of magnitude. Mm-hmm. So how important it is, we think is really important, especially if you're in a world now of dynamic tagging, where you're asking a human, hey, give me some examples so I can go and find that very specific thing you're looking for, right? How do you do that effectively so you don't have like a person labeling 1,000 data points, right? How, like, the question we ask is, how do we get somebody to give us 5 examples, and that's enough? And maybe we only need to ask for clarification of edge cases, right? And so if you're in that setting, right, it really flips the script.
So is it as much like shrinking the data set size as much as it is maybe getting better training examples in that data set? And if it's the latter part, then how do you know when you've reached something that's useful?
No, this is a great question, and honestly, this is part of why we're launching the benchmark. Because I think if people really start tackling these questions, we're going to get. I mean, there's some initial answers to these, but I think what's much more interesting is to have folks from different fields and really try different approaches, right?
Interesting.
To essentially answer these questions. If you go out there and you look, people are doing this for models, right?
Yeah.
But we should be doing this for data as well. And so yeah, really that's kind of the long-term vision, that we motivate essentially people asking this question, and then we, I think I can't speak for everyone in the data perf movement, but I think definitely the spirit of it is just like, we really want people to start to shift that focus, and we don't know what we don't know, and that's what we think is a lot of low-hanging fruit. Yeah.
This is exciting.
Yeah, no, it's really fun. I think we're big believers in the movement there. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I think especially what's really interesting to us is each data modality has its own nuances, and so a lot of focus right now is just on text, right, because of kind of everything that's been going on in the past year. But as we start shifting more towards multimodal things, then that's where I think the conversation gets even richer and more. That's where you really start like nerding out.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that, because we were up hanging out in the office talking about the role, and he was mentioning a multimodal RAG, which is pretty fascinating. I mean, that's
we have Aman joining us later at the event, and
nice.
If you want to talk RAG, he's the guy.
Jeez, man, it's crazy how fast this stuff is moving.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you think about it too, just I think like last week with the developer conference from OpenAI, it gives you just like, I don't know, it really humbles you to just how fast this whole thing can move. I mean, just think back like to where we were 2 years ago and where we are today. It's like night and day, and so.
Well, these weren't the discussions 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. It was ML ops, and now it's LLM ops, and all this fun stuff, which I think started out as a meme. I think, at least in April, I think Demetrios was having his, Demetrios from MLOps community for the audience, but he was having his, I think, we're kind of joking on Slack. It's like, it's doing LLM Ops conference. I think now it's like an actual thing.
It's a thing, yeah, no. And my spicy prediction for 2024 is going to be not LLMs, but LMMs, large multimodal models. It's going to be the next thing, Yeah, that's my spicy predictions. Stay tuned.
I don't think it's too spicy. It's where everything's going, multimodal.
Yeah, no, because I think that's kind of the next piece. And I think part of the interesting challenge there is just there's a very different notion of data volumes. So the rough numbers that we use is, if you look at the Wikipedia data set, very, very roughly speaking, I think if you take 10 million documents, I believe it's about 40 gigabytes or so of data.
Right.
So, it's you can hold it in disk. You can kind of hold it in memory if you get a big enough machine. But it's challenging, of course, right? But if you once you switch over to just images, if you take open images, for example, that's about close to 10 million images, and now you're in the order of like 15 to 20 terabytes, right?
Yeah.
It's a very different scale, right? There's no notion of holding this in memory, right? There's no Maybe if you have like a big enough hard drive, you can hold it in disk, right? But even then, it's like challenging. So like what happens and what breaks about all the things you're doing today once you go from tens of gigabytes to tens of terabytes, and that's where I think it gets really interesting. Because I think a lot of the things that we're doing today, of like say with LLMs, you can just ship a lot of this text over the internet to get predictions and get inference, right? Like what happens once like, hey, I can't just ship 16 terabytes of like video over the internet, right? Or I can't just do it. It just it's a very fundamentally different scale where you not only have to worry about just the AI and the model serving piece, but you now have to start worrying about literally just piping data from point A to point B, and you really start to get at the heart of the intersection of like data systems and AI. And that's where if you are to like my prediction of to like what are the things that people are going to be tackling a lot as far as like infrastructure and tooling, it's going to be that like once we go to the world where it's not LLMs but it's LMMs, right? What is that tooling? What is that infra? Right? What is, and more importantly, I think to go back to what you always say, Joe, like what are some of the fundamental pieces there? Like how do we think about data modeling in that perspective?
Well, it's an interesting one because it's a combinatorial problem too. Because with text, for example, it's smaller in size, but arguably more complex, just because of the various combinations you can come up with. And so text is gnarly in that sense. It's not big bite size, but it's big in the sense where you can just this is the combination of words, for example, it can explode in context and meaning and all that stuff. And then like trying to combine this now with large data sets and systems, like video and all these multimodal things. That's where it kind of breaks my brain a bit.
And to your point, images are really complex as well, right? And one of the things that gets really interesting is like if you think about it, text can actually be tokenized. Like there's some notion of like discrete units of meaning in text, right? But there's no, and so you can have things like kind of like weak supervision where you write some rough rules, right? Of like, oh, if this thing is there, then you can do those kind of like tricks, right? But there's no notion of like if this pixel is red and that one's black, then this is a car, right? And so there's no notion of discrete token of unit of meaning, at least not to my limited knowledge. And so you get into a world where it gets really interesting, and then once you go to video, you add the pixel piece plus the temporal component, and then all of a sudden, if you have like actions or you have things like that, then there's an audio cause and effect, and now you have audio on top of it. So you've really gone to like a multimodal domain where not only is the quantity of data much larger, but you have these three domains of data tied by space and cause and effect, and so it gets into some interesting challenges. I mean, one of the parts I'll say is too is because we've been tackling video for a bit, is people don't realize how much nuance there is sometimes in video. Like people are realizing now in text, right, that there's very different forms of text. But even in video, it's like you can be in the world of TikTok videos, right? You can be in the world of Zoom calls. You can be in the world of surveillance video. You can be in the world of like cinematic video, and all of these have very, very different properties and need different approaches. And so I think, but honestly, I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for folks that are thinking about building solutions, because I think the problem is so large once you open up all the modalities of data that I don't think there is going to be a single king. I think selfishly, we're trying to be the category king for images and video, but frankly speaking, I think like that there's just a lot of work to be done. There's not only a lot of tooling that needs to be done, but there's a lot of conversations that need to happen about fundamentally how we think about interacting with those systems and those data systems and how the AI fits into all the picture. That it's just a different level of conversation that I think is just starting with AI today, but it will just be a lot more complex once we start going into the multimodal realm.
So I mean, does that seem like there's going to be like kind of a multimodal perf then at some point? Does data perf cover the multimodal case?
Don't quote me on this one. I haven't checked the ML.
No, it's only on a podcast. That's fine.
But I mean, this was also our approach to with data perf. Like part of it is we wanted to come up with the original benchmarks to motivate a lot of the folks that want to come later and establish their own. And so, but whether it's through like data perf or ML perf or some sort of other benchmark, I think the bigger piece there is no matter how it happens, there's these fundamental conversations about how we think about multimodal data in their unstructured domain interacting with AI and those systems, that we can kind of get away with today, but we're not going to be able to get away with in 2024 and going forward.
Sure. And we still haven't discussed, I think, the dark horse in the room, which is structured data, which is the tiniest. But I would also argue it may be among the most gnarly, in the sense where this is truly human-generated, inconsistently weird in most cases. So I worked at a few machine learning startups, and we were focused on AutoML and unstructured data sets. And I got to tell you, unstructured data felt a lot easier than this stuff, because you get typos, you get just random stuff. And then the thing is, like, trying to make sense of all these corporate data sets. I mean, they're hard enough to do analytics on, right?
Yeah.
And then now the notion is blending this together with text, audio, video, all these other data sets, and it's going to be very interesting to see. Because I'm doing a lot of work with Texas SQL, for example, and it's very interesting. And this is part of the work I've been doing on my data modeling book. And it turns out that having a good data model under the hood actually is pretty important for the structured, semi-structured database. Just because of query performance and all this other stuff that goes into it, coming with correct column names for SQL query and so forth. So it's interesting. I feel like this is. I love your take on this, but to me it seems like the structured data sets and bringing and bridging the corporate data sets, these structured data sets with all these unstructured data sets, like that could potentially be a last mile problem. I don't know. Maybe you've dealt with this already and have a different take,
I mean, to your point, like. The only thing I can add, I think you're totally right. I think we were tackling some really big problems. We haven't even mastered some of the old ones, right? And if I can add a second dark horseman, right, is in the world of unstructured data too. Like if you go back 5 years ago, most pieces of unstructured data you can assume were created by a human. But if you go in time 5 years, are you going to be able to tell whether that was a human or a machine, right? And more importantly, if you would lower the barrier to create unstructured content by like 1,000x, what does that do in terms of the sheer amount of data that we will have, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the other part too.
That's
where,
huge.
The thing I think about a lot of those consequences is, with generative AI, anyone can really go and create this amazing like unstructured content. I think
or
that's
anything,
fantastic. Anything, yeah,
can create it.
Video is up and coming, but images and text is kind of already here, right? And what does that mean from the standpoint of just the sheer volume and things that we're going to have to go and make sense of?
Oh, that's
Yeah.
It makes me really sad. Well,
it's
an interesting one though. Well, it's exciting at the same time, but it's also like just from just the utility aspect. Okay, so because you're absolutely right. It's anyone can create data sets now, and going forward, it reminds me a lot of where the internet was back in like 1994 or something. I was there, and this is right when the browser came out. Mosaic came out, and it was very primitive at the time, right? So I remember some of the earliest web pages were just GIFs that were like a megabit, and it took forever to download these things. But it was super cool. It's like there's an image of people that I don't know, and fast forward to today, and this stuff can be generated by computers en masse, or bots, and like who knows? I mean, there's an old stat, not old, but what is it? Like by 2025, which is very very soon, like 95% of the content on the internet will be AI generated, and and honestly, like I believe it. I think the way I think about it is like 5 years ago, I could tell anything on the internet was pretty much made by a human. Right.
But 5 years from now, like there's no you won't be able to tell.
I was reading something like Hacker News today, or maybe it was that or Tech Meme, but it was like people thought that the AI generated images actually looked more realistic than the ones made by humans. So.
The not to go down the dark route, but like the whole dystopian thing here that's really kind of messed up is like we always think of, if you go back to the 50s, people are like, oh yes, let's use automation and robots to like have them do all the laborious tasks and then leave the humans to make all the art and all the things. And I feel like it's we got the opposite. We're like, hey, the AI is doing all the video and the images, and we're doing all the data cleaning.
This wasn't I think on anybody's bingo card several years ago, but wherever we are, and I think to your point, it's easy to be dystopian about this. I mean, Lord knows I can go down that rabbit hole, but I think there's enough cool stuff going on though, and I think it's a really exciting time. As much as my blog posts and my podcast talk about how I think there's short term, I think a lot of hype in the AI space. I mean, this is not the first time this has happened. This has happened several times, at least in the last 15 years I've seen. Go through cycles with ML and AI. I think this is the first time, though, that you've seen a large consumer interest in it. I think to your point, your dad's playing with ChatGPT and was like, this seems pretty damn awesome.
It was funny. It was just a few months ago, and my dad was like, "Oh, have you heard of this like OpenAI thing?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've heard of it."
He asked you that? That's cute.
I feel like if you want to find reasons to get dystopian about it, you always can. So that's not really that exciting. What's a lot more exciting is to think about the opportunities here.
Yeah.
If there's anything I can, any folks that are listening that are thinking about building something cool right now, it's a lot easier now to get started than ever. Right?
Oh yeah.
And I think you're always going to be thinking like, well, it's the same for everybody, but like I just think there's so many open problems to tackle that it's a really exciting time.
It's cool. Like I'm starting a new company. I'm thinking,
nice.
It's a content publishing company. My new book's going to be on it, and the thing I'm most excited about is just how much of the back office operations can I automate. Even with ChatGPT, custom GPTs, and a bunch of workflows like that.
Joe GPT,
Joe GPTs. Well, I mean, I'm still going to write the book on my own. I know what ChatGPT can do, and it does okay.
Have to check.
Yeah, I mean, I've. So a while ago, I was actually experimenting with it. It's okay, so if I were to write a book on a topic, maybe data modeling, what would it look like? And there's still going to have to be the notion of a story arc, and I think your personality in it. And so I use it more to ideate for books, but I don't use it. I mean, it would go against my ethics, I think, to actually just have it write a book. I would just feel like a complete moron, and it would go against my brand. But I think that there's a lot of utility. I use it as a conversational agent to get new ideas I don't think of. But it's writing style. I mean, I just have a very different writing style, so it would look really weird.
It's like the rubber duck that talks back, right?
It's a rubber duck, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But the thing is, like, how many back office functions could you automate using AI? And one of the things I've always thought about is, okay, so would it be possible that I could have a company that is basically run by bots and that just does everything? That would be cool.
So what's really funny is that this is something I always joke about with my friends, right? Is like, I think there's on one side you have some people like even doing like BDR and cold outreach, which is like bots, right? And there's some folks on the other end that's like, oh, there's so much volume, I'm going to automate this too, right? And I think, if there's any funny dystopian future, is a future where the internet is just bots talking to each other, and then, that's the business.
I mean, it's already APIs talking to each other, so,
automate the whole thing.
Yeah, because I mean, I've thought about it. I mean, anything, because, when I've run companies in the past, it's always my mandate is, automate or delegate.
Yeah.
As much as you can, focus on what you're good at. So
that's awesome. Well, what's the book you're going to be? The data modeling book?
Yeah, data modeling. Nice. Yeah, and it's kind of cool. So the way I'm approaching this, this new company is directly related to AI, actually, right? So it's the notion of, and writing is continuously going to be more and more commoditized. Mm-hmm. Writing books, it's going to be done by bots. It already is. Amazon, for example, last month they announced a 3-book limit for an author. So an author can publish 3 books per day, max. Right? Oh, you can see where this goes.
Yeah.
Right? So, and I'm like, okay, so then I look at what I've been doing for my own book, and it's okay. So we're doing book clubs, doing book signings at the event that's coming up in just a bit, actually.
Okay.
And and other things. And people, I think, increasingly are going to want more, intimate and. Not intimate in that way, but depends on your book, I guess. But there, I think they want more conversation and more kind of personal touch with the author and the personality behind it, and as well as building an audience around the idea. Like, this is something that doesn't really happen in books right now. It's like, the book is written, it's lobbed over the wall to the audience, and then maybe people buy it, maybe they don't. So the notion is, for me, it's like write the book in public, get it out there, build the audience and the community around the idea of the book, and I think that's something that's going to be hard to replace, at least for now. Give it 2 weeks. I'm sure somebody will come up with a bot that does all this, but that's really the notion of it, because it's the publishing model. I feel like we're still trying to carry on a model that's been around for 100 plus years, and it works, I think, to some extent. But if you look at what's happening with authors, they get on podcasts. People want to enjoy the conversations with the authors, not just read the book. And so, I'm just seeing what that looks like, in tech and data books and so forth.
Yeah, and if there's anything I can say too is like I think you can use all these tools to kind of automate, like just write, like you can automate like just kind of regurgitating things.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like really writing fundamental stuff, there's just still no replacement for just like someone that actually sat down, thought about it for a long time, like banged their heads against the wall,
That's just
and came up with something new. And I think where the opportunity really here, especially what I'm really excited for what you're talking about here, like Joe, is like you always mention like the boring shit, right? And like the fundamentals. And I think there's a whole notion of conversations that aren't happening now that I think need to happen. And I mean, I don't think there's any notion of getting like a ChatGPT to like write it for you. It's just
it wouldn't know.
It doesn't exist, right? Exactly.
No. I mean, just the same thing. It wouldn't have the insight to write data perf. It would just be like, it's just not
exactly
going to happen.
It's not part of the existing lingo, and it's not obvious that it's not obvious to extrapolate it based on what's happened so far.
No, I mean, you would have to be like in the top, I don't know, 1,000th of 1% of practitioners to have these insights. It's like people like you and Cody, it's like cream of the crop. Like you guys are pushing the industry forward, and but it takes that operating at that level to have those insights. Like a person like me wouldn't have that insight because I'm not in it all day. You are, right? So it's a different ball game.
Well, I mean, I read your Substack. I might disagree. I think you definitely have the insights.
Well, just for that specific domain, was what I'm saying. Like you guys are, you operate in it's all about niches, right? So, it's that's awesome. Like, looking at my clock, I should probably get to our event soon. So the audience, we're doing the first MLOps meetup
in Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley.
Yeah, join between Coactive and MLOps, and it should be fun. Our only downside of this event is that the limit was like 80 people or so. So we'll see. I really hope
How many
we
registrations did we get?
We got like 150 people registered.
Okay.
But usually like half of the people show up.
Okay.
And it's
meetup
raining.
math. Yeah.
It's raining in the Bay Area, which means like maybe we get a quarter. So I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah, I've run meetups in the past too, and it's who knows? It's all a different day.
Yeah, you never know, but at least we wanted to kind of create the space for it, especially because I think down here and it's a pleasure to have you, Joe, speaking about all this as well, and I think it's going to be really interesting. We're going to hear from Flo at Fandom. He's a VP of Data and Engineering there. He's going to do a talk about what's all this mean for like a real enterprise that's doing this in the kind of the online community setting.
Right.
Aman, who's a CTO of Contextual, he's like they're at the very forefront of RAG, and he's going to talk about here's some tribal knowledge about how to train like RAG models, which it's kind of interesting, but a lot of that knowledge truly is tribal, and like there's not a whole lot of like, because it's moving so fast. These are the kind of moments where you hear these experts talk, and you learn lessons that you otherwise would have had to bang your head against the wall for 6 months to figure out, right? And then of course from you, Joe, it's gonna be wonderful just kind of chatting through all the different pieces, and big shout out to MLOps community, big shout out to Raul, and shout out to you, Joe, for making all the way out here.
Shout out to you too
from Utah.
Yeah, and I love coming out here too. Just the guests you mentioned, Flo and Armand. It's like you don't find this anywhere else. This area is so stacked with talent. It's ground zero for just what's happening in the world.
And what I love is just kind of being in those spaces with people. I mean, you know this best because you go and you talk to data nerds all over the world. There's something about not just being in a Zoom call, but being in person that's really powerful. And so we're just happy to have you here, Joe.
Well, thanks. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. All right, we'll chat soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.